Romarilyn. How are you?
Hi, Sarah. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well too. So I thought we would start this conversation just by introducing ourselves generally. So I'm Sarah Haley. I teach US history, carceral history, abolition, gender studies, and I generally try to do abolition and abolitionist feminist work. And I also organize with Scholars for Social Justice. Romarilyn.
My name is Romarilyn Ralston. I'm a Black feminist abolitionist. I'm also formerly incarcerated and served 23 years in a California prison. I'm currently the executive director of Project Rebound at Cal State University Fullerton. I'm on the coordinating committee and longtime member of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. I also serve on a number of national boards around higher education for formerly incarcerated people. And I'm so happy to be your friend.
I'm so happy to be your friend too. It is a gift, one of my favorite gifts, and you teach me so much all the time. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And so we're brought together to talk about, to kind of extend last year's American Studies conference and think about the theme, The Roof is on Fire, and the relationship between precarity and possibility, creation, destruction, fire itself. So I thought maybe we could start by thinking about our own relationship to fire as resource, as metaphor, as job, as labor. So I don't know if you want to go first or if I should go first. Up to you.
Well, I'll go first. Fire is a big topic. It's been a part of my life. Before prison, after prison, while in prison. You know, all of the fire songs from the 70s and 80s. Love all of those songs. The roof is on fire. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so while inside prison, I worked for a number of years as a fire camp trainer within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Since the 1940s, California has used the labor of incarcerated people to fight wildland fires across the state to save, of course, property and lives. And as a fire camp trainer, you know, I was able to see and support, you know, hundreds of women over the years in their, you know, quest to fight fires for their own liberation from the carceral system. Fire camps are a way for incarcerated people to get outside of the prison, but also to serve their time, to make a little bit of money, but at the expense of their own lives. But we can talk a little bit about my experience with fire camp. We can also talk about, you know, fire as a metaphor. You know, CCWP, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, we use the symbol of fire as our kind of motif for our website and for a lot of our literature. You know, the fire from within prisons we talk a lot about, and that's kind of the metaphor for our work, because inside prisons and jails across this country, not just in California, you know, are brilliant, amazing, you know, creative individuals that have a fire within their bellies while they're in the belly of the beast that needs to come out. And so CCWP's work was born inside of facilities in California where, you know, women were facing some horrendous medical treatment. And our motif, as I said, is now this beautiful flame, because, you know, flames are just beautiful when you look at fire and you think about fire and what it consists of. You know, you look at the fire triangle, you need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need heat to create fire. And the prison is a perfect metaphor for all of those things. But getting back to CCWP, you know, the Fire Inside has been a newsletter that our organization has sent inside of prisons across California, whether they're men's or women's prisons. And it includes, you know, policy and advocacy work, poetry, artwork, you know, our organizing labor across the state, the work that we're doing with other organizations across the country. But it's also a way for incarcerated members of CCWP and others, just incarcerated people, to contribute, you know, to a journal, to a newsletter that was going to go out across the state and oftentimes across the country to some of our members who have moved outside of the state. Mm-hmm. And it's just a beautiful way to keep that energy flowing. Mm-hmm. And so a few years ago during COVID, we also created the Fire on the Outside, which is a support group.
You set something on fire on the outside?
You know, wherever we go, we set something on fire.
Yeah.
Because that's what we are. Mm-hmm. And we started that during COVID, and now we have a support group for our folks coming home to just stay in community. Because I think that's really important for us to do while we're inside and when we come home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I want to get to all of that. And I think we have so much to talk about. You know, I know you to be a very fiery person. And so it's just exciting to hear just from your experience, but also your analysis of precarity, possibility, and how that manifests through fire. So it's interesting to hear you talk about your relationship to fire in terms of the fire camp, right? And the labor that is used, marshaled, and exploited inside prison. I mean, my own relationship to fire is probably in thinking about it in terms of Black women's longer term relationship to the prison system and to captivity. Reading Angela Davis's reflections on the Black women's role in the community of slaves, which she wrote from inside, as you know, in the early 1970s, and thinking about those everyday forms of rebellion that included fire, that included poisoning. So thinking about kind of the way that fire is an everyday weapon. And then in my own research on imprisoned women in convict lease camps and in state farms in the South, you know, they literally set the prison on fire and worked in conspiracy to do so, and were very strategic about, you know, the section of the prison that they set on fire, which was the warden's residence and the women's section of the prison as part of an escape plan. And so, you know, it's interesting to think about the role of fire in both rebellion, you know, as a way to break out, but then, as you're saying, you know, fire work and labor in fighting wildfires in our current moment as a way to make some money, and I assume earn good time, and yet, even in that kind of extraction and labor exploitation, there's certain precarity in terms of who is eligible, right, to do that work, who is qualified. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that, because I'm really interested in how, you know, you were a trainer for certain reasons, and, you know, the kind of precarity that is involved in both fighting the fire, but the precarity that is reinforced by being excluded from that work, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. As within the prison, there's all types of labor. And in order to get assigned to a position, a work position, or even education, you have to go through what's called a classification committee. Mm-hmm. And in that classification committee, that consists of most likely someone from education department, associate warden, a number of captains, lieutenants, and some other staff. Then they look at your file, your educational background, your work history, the things that you put in your file when you entered into prison, or in all of your records that have come with you from jail. And they try to make an assessment of where you would fit best within the labor force of the prison. If you don't have a minimum of high school diploma or GED, then you're going to automatically be assigned to education, because in the state of California, there's a literacy mandate. But if you have a high school diploma, GED, or some college, then they want to look at your skill set. But they also look at your commitment offense and whether or not you are classified as minimum security, medium security, maximum security. And based on that, then they can now rank you in certain positions that are closer to the fence line, the outside of the prison. And fire camp is one of those positions where one needs to have a minimum security level, which means folks who are committed under serious felonies are ineligible for fire camp, like myself. But because we are also part of the prison labor and we're there for long periods of time, we're often used in positions where we can create stability, long-term stability.
Right, right. That makes sense.
And so the women who are classified as minimum security and who pass a medical exam, which is very minimum, can then be assigned to fire camp. And although the prison itself says that these are voluntary positions, you're voluntold. It's not voluntary.
Like you're explicitly voluntold, or you're coerced because you need the work and the credit and all that. So how does that actually happen?
Well, a number of ways. If it's fire season and they need bodies, everyone coming through that fits the criteria: minimum security, able-bodied, fire camp, fire camp, fire camp.
Wow.
And then sometimes when it's off season, folks may have a choice. They may say, well, you can do this or you can do this. But then there's always that reassignment. They can just pull you out of a job, out of an education program, and put you in fire camp. So
if you are safe enough to risk your own life to go save, the environment, to go save property, to go save capitalism, but you have to be low security risk in order to do that.
Absolutely. So it's okay for you to put your life on the line for $1 an hour, but you also have to, not be a flight risk per se, because the fire camps are located, all the conservation camps are located within the counties themselves.
Right. So I'm struck by the fact that you have to be minimum security to go out and fight fires, but you can be maximum security, so to speak, and train other people to do it, which is just such a hypocritical and contradictory. Like there's no internal reasoning, because if you were so dangerous, perhaps you shouldn't be training other people about how to go out into the world either, presumably. So it's just this kind of morose, bizarre, perverse attempt to organize people inside with, and to really create hierarchies, right? I mean, I don't know if that played out.
Well, definitely, the prison system creates hierarchies in all of their positions. There's clerks and leads, and it just goes all the way down, even with the pay. Non-pay is the bottom, and then $1 an hour is the top. And so that's how the prison system operates, by categorizing people, separating people, creating hierarchies, dividing folks, separation, incapacitation, all of those things that we know the prison system is. And, if fire season is one of those moments within the the span of the prison life where folks know, they can get work.
Mm-hmm.
They can go out, they can get to the community so their kids can visit them. Their time can be shortened. All of these things drive folks to want to be part of the fire camp. One of the reasons why I wanted to be a trainer was because, get this, I could make $56 a month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I was physically fit. I ran a number of exercise programs through the recreation department. And one of the highest paying jobs in the prison is, of course, prison industry, mm-hmm. which is sweatshop, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and fire camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, so it's a desire created by precarity, right? Created mm-hmm. by like the poverty of being inside, the deprivation of being outside, the deprivation of long sentences and seeing family and all that. And, so they can say it's voluntary and it may technically not be forced, but it certainly is like everything else coerced. And I wonder, when you talk about this, you're kind of matter of fact. And I wonder about how did you experience that more affectively? Like, were you in community with other women and mostly thinking about making sure that you train them in a way where they were safe? Or did you feel angry? Did you feel extracted? I'm just wondering, what the experience was like on a more interior level.
Yeah, I mean, you feel all of those things because you're working with people, human beings, mm-hmm. and women who have come from some of the most traumatic situations, pre-incarceration. And so you get to know each other. So you do build community and intimacy. And when you're sitting down having your lunch break or you're walking around, people are talking, mm-hmm. and they're sharing some of their deepest secrets, mm-hmm. and greatest harms. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you're listening to these broken women that you're building up, mm-hmm. to be stronger, mm-hmm. to be resilient, mm-hmm. to be firefighters. And so it's incredible to be in that position, to wipe a tear from someone's face, mm-hmm. and then also support them with lifting 50 pounds over their head. And to hear them talk about their children and how they need to get back to them and the things they want to do different. And it's all of that happens in the relationship of training. Whenever you're training,
they have to do to get back to them.
Yeah. Yeah. The brokenness,
the suffocation, the lifting, the arduous labor, the risk, it's vile.
And it has to be done quickly. Mm-hmm. There's an urgency to it because the demand of the state on the body, mm-hmm. we need bodies. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of the women going through the program will keep their pain a secret. Will keep their physical injuries a secret because they want to continue on the journey to get to camp. And as soon as they can get checked off, as soon as they can run that mile in under 15 minutes, do those push-ups, do those sit-ups, squat thrusts, burpees, lift those weights, then they're off to the training. Mm-hmm. And then they're off to camp 2 weeks after that. And so it's this kind of momentum that drives folks to endure continued suffering. Mm-hmm. The body is broken twice, in order to get these women prepared to go out and mm-hmm. fight fires on the side of a mountain. And when they get there, oftentimes, they're not prepared for fire. Fire it consumes, 100-year-old trees.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. The heat, the soot, the smoke. It's terrifying. And so women come back from those experiences, sometimes even more traumatized than when they went out in the first place. And some of them love it, but most of them don't. They have no idea what they're prepared for. They sit in the classroom and watch some videos of firefighters.
Right.
But when you get there and you feel that burn on your skin, it's a whole different feeling.
And you didn't go through years of training to do it, right? And so that's your kind of position is like this triage training, like an ER kind of situation for environmental catastrophe that is man-made, that is the result of capitalism, that is gendered. It's about, being able to build homes in particular areas that are not, fit for commercial and residential development. It is about a kind of, capitalism's ever marching need for circulation and expansion and intrusion into unenclosed commons areas, right? It's about enclosure. And so you have the precariousness of women who have been dispossessed to racial capitalism and gendered racial capitalism, then incurring and being on the front lines of saving the kind of most unscrupulous forms of that capitalism, which is not to say that anyone, we hope that no one is injured in wildfires, right? Least of all the people who have been forced and coerced to fight them. But the fact of the matter is that so much of the deforestation and that fire is about people wanting to build where, where it's wooded, where it is, natural lands. And so it's just such a layered system of extraction and violence, extreme violence. And so for you to talk about the trauma of it is
and
really
exploitation.
powerful.
Yeah. That's when you finish your sentence and you're released, even with that kind of experience, employment is often, not an option for you with CAL FIRE. Even in California, we try to be progressive with legislation, but it's still a problem for folks to get employment when they leave the fire camp system. A couple of years back, a bill was passed, AB 2147, that is supposed to expedite the expungement process so that folks with experience fighting fires can actually get an EMT license, because that's the holdup.
Right.
Not that you're not trained and you're not able to do the work. As a felon, you're not able to get an EMT license.
Right. But this reminds me of other organizing work that you've done, and this isn't directly related to fire, but definitely related to questions that, as much as many of us say we're in carceral studies and do abolitionist work and all of this stuff, it's like the detailed forms of forced precarity are like never ending. And so I'm reminded in this conversation of your work around Social Security inside, which I would love to, hear about, and how you came to that organizing and that policy work, because this is something that, many of us, when we think about, in American studies, when we're thinking about racial capitalism and the wealth and welfare and neoliberalism, we're not thinking about, Social Security inside.
No one is thinking about the person that has been disappeared. Behind these prison walls, and what our lives are going to be like when we come home. Now, when I came home after 23 years and I started working again, and I set up my Social Security account and all of that, when I pulled my record up, it just blew my mind that I had only worked, 5 years. And then I had 23 years of non-work, 23 zeros, where I earned nothing.
Because none of your work inside prison counts toward Social Security retirement.
No, it does not. And
Didn't.
so when we're incarcerated for long periods of time, we come home, we have no Social Security built
Mhm.
and no retirement, although we are employees of the state.
Right. Working the whole time, most of the time.
Oh, you must work because the Title 15, the California Code of Regulations says that every able-bodied incarcerated person must work.
Mhm.
You must work.
Mhm.
It is not optional.
Mhm.
So to have no retirement, no Social Security, no savings, no way of supporting yourself. It hit me when I came home and I realized at 50 something years old, when I wrote this brief for UCLA, is, this needs to change. We need to look at, how we're setting people up to spend their golden years when they come home, at the expense of the state and punishment. We talk about reentry and the needs for reentry and, what it takes for someone to be successful. Well, it should start inside.
Right.
When we say reentry starts upon entering the system, that's what we should be working on, an exit plan and what that exit plan should look like. And it should include Social Security, it should include retirement. And I think there's ways of doing that work because within the prison system, there's such horrendous amounts of markup on goods and services that go into this general fund called the Inmate Welfare Fund. And this fund pays for a lot of state employees' retirement and benefits. It should also be used for incarcerated. For incarcerated people as well.
Yeah.
It's our money. It's our family's money. We're paying, these ridiculous amounts of money for a bar of soap and a tube of toothpaste. And at the end of that, to be able to recover some of that.
Right.
Would be, I think, transformative to the system.
Right. Or another way of putting it is that after working for 20 something years, you don't deserve, you deserve the Social Security number. One deserves the Social Security benefits. Also, one deserves not to be rendered, vulnerable to premature death without the resources of life in elder years. I mean, this is permanent incarceration. This is not trivial. This is not benign. This is not one benefit. This is a lifeline. People live on this. And that kind of dispossession, that kind of precarity, by virtue of having worked inside prison, right? It's about like where you worked, being excluded because of where you work, because of working under captivity. And that being an extension of a violent future forever, right? That's, Social Security is into perpetuity. So it's deep and I don't know, intense to think about.
Yeah, and we look at the houseless population. There are more people on the streets now who are either over the age of 55 or under the age of 25. Those are the two largest populations of folks who are unhoused.
Right.
When people exit prison, there's gate money, $200. Everyone gets the same amount of gate money or no money. So for some type of retirement fund to be set up so that folks don't end up homeless, houseless, or set up to the point where they have no other choice but to return to the conditions of prison just so that they can have a place to sleep and a meal to eat. You know, so it's all of that too, that I think we need to be looking at when we talk about abolition and criminal justice reforms.
Right. Well, can you say a little bit more about what you did as part of like efforts to make people eligible? I remember this just from knowing you, but what was the kind of campaign for Social Security inside?
There was no campaign for Social Security inside.
Okay.
No, I wrote this once I was released just a few years ago.
Okay.
And we actually had an opportunity to speak to a number of public defenders in LA County and other lawyers that were interested in how we could think through actually actualizing, you know, this kind of policy. And as I think about it more, now that you brought it back up, you know, I think it's time for us to really do something about it.
Yeah.
And we have to. Yeah, now you've got me thinking about who I should be calling and saying, you know, we need
I wasn't trying to impose work on you, but I thought about this because you have done such a range of organizing, and I was only reminded of this, reminded of your writing and our conversations about this when we were talking about fire and when you were talking about the disappeared, right? And so it's about the disappeared people and the disappeared issues that are so numerous by virtue of spending years and years under captivity, the kind of compounded loss, the kind of compounded toll, in ways that elude us, even when we feel like we're paying very close attention, even I think when people talk about the experience of prison, it's often not, well, I lost my future access to years and years of benefits, because that's seen as so far afield of what people should be entitled to. Precarity is construed as, permanent precarity is construed as part of the sentence, right? Yeah, so I mean, that kind of brings us to this question of fire and organizing and CCWP, which, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, which you have led for all of these years, does such incredible work to both offset or alleviate or try and ameliorate precarity every day, vulnerabilities, and also to dismantle imprisonment. And, I've always been struck by how CCWP is able to do both at once. And obviously, that is because it is led by people inside California prisons, all people who are imprisoned in California women's prisons. So, yeah, I was just wondering, it strikes me that the origins of CCWP really help us think about, kind of fire as Black feminist fuel, fire under duress, the origins of CCWP as a fight around healthcare for people inside California prisons, who were in dire straits, right? Facing dire conditions of medical neglect, and organizing and starting this newsletter. And so I was just wondering your thoughts about kind of, why the fire inside, what you make of that as a kind of organizing framework or argument or motif, as you said.
Well, I wish I would have thought of it, but I didn't.
I know. I'm just thinking about your reflections now, because you ran with it, the fire outside, with the new work that you're starting. I think it's powerful in kind of thinking about this relationship between what you alluded to before, which is beauty and wreckage. You talked about the beauty of community and relation inside. And the fire inside reflects a kind of interiority, a desire, right? As well as, the anger that defines the experience of imprisonment and the hope that, prisons will burn one day and be rendered obsolete. So, I don't know if you have kind of reflections on that moment of CCWP's beginning and what we might learn about this relationship between like strength and vulnerability, or precariousness and organizing.
Yeah, well, CCWP's work, as you said, started inside with a fight for better healthcare, but then it grew into all of these other, amazing opportunities to be supportive of women inside. So through Writing Warriors, there's a continuation of building relationships with incarcerated women, with volunteers who write letters, because many of us inside have burned bridges, and we're trying to reignite relationships.
Yeah.
And so it's so important to have that process of writing, reintroduced into your life, to have connection with someone on the outside of the prison if you can. And so Writing Warriors is so important, and it provides a lifeline, to a lot of our members inside. And then there's, our legal visiting team, folks who are fighting for their lives through the Board of Prison Hearings, having to appear before the parole board, having to, show themselves vulnerable over and over and over again, and relive, traumatic experiences over and over again, to have support around preparing for that trauma and re-traumatization, but also helping us to present ourselves, because we're always, presenting ourselves when you're incarcerated. There's that's constant.
I cannot imagine the pressure of that kind of presentation over and over, not just every day, like with the kind of authority inside, but then, and parole. And then when you are presenting oneself, for a job, having had a record, and then clemency, it's like a constant performance. It's a show.
Yeah. Performance.
Where the stakes are so high.
Yeah. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And that's a whole nother show. But yeah, and through again, commutation and pardon process. So we have all of these different ways of supporting folks inside and outside through the organization, so that when we come home, we don't have to perform. We can live. We can be ourselves, our authentic selves. We can actually become ourselves instead of constantly reinventing ourselves through, the performance of survival inside of a cage. CCWP has been that for me and for so many women. And now that we've expanded across the state to have 2 chapters, one in LA and in the Bay Area,
right,
where we can now, not only support folks inside, but when folks come home, there's ways that folks can be employed, can still do movement work, and then still get back to the folks that they left in the communities behind the walls. So it's been really a saving grace for me.
Mhm.
So many of my friends have come home, but still so many of them are still there. And so to be out here fighting the good fight, fighting all of those fires,
Right.
which I think is indicative of all of those policies that were created in the 90s and early 2000s on,
Right.
you know, all of that tough on crime crap.
Mhm. Mhm.
We've got to put out all of those fires,
Right.
you know, so that we can, you know, create something more beautiful for our folks.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that, the fire extinguishment is part of that creation, that in the doing, in the making of, abolitionist organizing, which is putting out fires, as you say, it's part of that, also that building work. And that's hard to balance. I think it's hard when you talk about those repeated performances. I feel like the fire of rage inside me. Like I just will not I will not convey like my desire toward, of what might happen to the members of a parole board or all those judges, right? Got all of those people who are part of the state who are passing judgment constantly. And again, part of the disappearance of what we think of as the violence of incarceration. It's not just the physical brutality that happens, it is that emotional taxation, that exhaustion, which of course has a psychic and bodily toll. Um, but it is always something that in particular Black feminist, women of color feminist organizing has been able to balance so gracefully, is the relationship between that kind of fire and rage and the affection and intimacy of organizing. I recall, being at panels with you and Elisa Bieria and other folks talking about the intimacy of organizing. And so I'm trying to lean into that. But quite honestly, Romarilyn, this happens a lot when we talk. It's just hard to get past the rage, in particular, of the experience of the repetition of that performance. And it's such a range of performances, right? So you're training, I say you, but I mean, one is training someone to fight fire. So that's a performance of strength. And then you have to go to a performance of vulnerability. And then it's a performance of stoicism. And it's like trying to capture that perfect subject, right? You're trying to be a perfect subject before the law. And people think of that in terms of a trial, right? But, what you always teach us is that that is part of the sentence. That is a years long cultivated performance that you are required to do for any hopes of getting out, right? In a timely manner, particularly if you're sentenced to long-term
Yeah,
prison.
your freedom is contingent upon you performing well. And if you do not perform well, then most times you will not get out. You will die in prison. It will kill you.
But you
So
also um, not get out performing well every day, right? Like it's a gamble, or
it is a gamble.
I'm just struck by, performing well, not for the guarantee of getting out, but for the hope of getting out, right?
Exactly. And also I think there's something really radical about being able to play all of these roles too, for your own benefit. Because we're not meant to survive this system.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to survive it, not just survive it, maybe even thrive within it.
Mm-hmm.
For me to be able to do the organizing work that I was able to do inside, for me to build organizations, create programs, train women, I had to perform in a whole lot of ways so that I could have access to resources so that I could then give them to other women. And so, you know, it's
Yeah.
some of that too.
Well, can I ask you like a theoretical question?
Yes.
It is, I mean, I understand the magnitude of that resource building and of that organizing and of that relation and world building inside. And I'm wondering still, despite the magnitude of that being so beautiful and clear, whether or how you think about that as thriving versus surviving inside. In other words, I'm just struck by the language of being able to thrive inside prison. And, I know you
Yeah.
have particular ideas about that, and people have very different ways of describing what life is, how they would characterize that.
Yeah. And what I mean by thriving is if I wanted something, I could get it.
Okay.
I could go to administration, the warden, associate wardens, captains, lieutenants, sponsors, and say, we need X, Y, and Z.
Right. Okay.
And we could get it.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to build the African American Women Prisoners Association. We had a book club.
Mm-hmm.
We had dances. We had Juneteenth celebrations, Black Kwanzaa. We brought in. So that's what I mean by thriving. There wasn't any resistance. There wasn't any punishment. There wasn't anything withheld. So we were able to then create all of the things that we wanted to create for ourselves and for others, because at that time, we had no parole policies in California. None of us were going home. Every governor that had passed through here since Duke Majan had said, the only way you're going to leave prison is in a pine box. So we had to dig inside of ourselves and say, okay, how are we going to live here? How are we going to survive this? And so that performance was not only for the benefit of ourselves, but for our sisterhood, for our organizations, and for us to have access to all of these resources and things that would make our lives better. If we were going to leave in a pine box, we're going to leave this world the way we want it to go out.
Right. And so the pressures of the performance changes with the possibility of leaving, right? When parole is instituted.
Exactly. And when that door opened through the Lawrence case in 2007, when the California Supreme Court said, you just can't keep denying people parole because of the crime, because that's never going to change. Then we were able to then start to resist more and push back more, because we knew we had done all that we could do. Right. And freedom was going to eventually be guaranteed to us, because now the California Supreme Court said, they just can't hold us in captivity because they can't. And after that, things did change quite a bit inside. We weren't performing as much. We weren't, even dependent anymore on outside resources and things being brought in to pacify us. A lot of us stopped, singing and dancing, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And started to think about our futures and start to plan for it. Right. I know I did. Right. Right. And so in now contacting the outside world and being more engaged in what's happening out there and planning for a future, then you're able to see the prison for what it really is. And once you see it for what it really is, then you have to dismantle it. Well,
I always think about the way you talk about sociality inside and life inside as being particularly deep because of of the way that you are able to theorize thriving, which you define as being able to get like the resources that you need and sometimes even the resources that you want, and the need for abolition. In other words, abolition is not only necessary because things are 1000% deplorable to the point of intolerability all the time inside, right? Like it's always violent, it's always captivity, it's always brutal, right? But there are those contradictions inside that don't obviate or alleviate the need for the entire system to end, right?
I don't know about that. To end the whole system, you know, it's hard because now I'm free. I've been home 12 years today, 12 years. And when I think about those 23 years I spent inside, the first 5 was just trying to figure out,
Yeah.
you know, what this is and building relationships.
Yeah.
And then there came this period of time where, you know, okay, I'm stuck here. I had to really buy into it after the appeals ended and blah. And so as I start to mature and accept certain things about my condition, my perspective changed. And as I started to get older and I learned more, my perspective continued to change and change. And now that I've been home, like I said, you know, for 12 years, when I look back at that time and how I survived it, I'm looking for how I survived it. You know, what did I do? Why did I do what I did? And I'm trying to articulate that in my own mind. And I ask myself questions sometimes, why did I do the things that I did? And sometimes I don't even have an answer for that. So when you ask me questions, a lot of times, it's the first time I've ever thought about it, you know, and my response to you often, you get me to thinking a lot about.
Me to thinking a lot.
It's mutual. And, you know, when you ask me these kinds of questions, I'm always I'm in awe that I am still here.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and quite frankly, don't understand how I even made it out sometimes. And that's, so when I talk about performance and then when I talk about thriving, when I talk about, you know, labor and building community and love and resistance, it was all of those things at different points. My incarceration.
Wait, so is that the hesitance to agree about the whole system ending? Because I know you to be identified politically as an abolitionist. But then when we start talking about certain forms of relation inside, I feel like maybe it feels, you know, thinking about fire, violent to extinguish that. Like, how can that intimacy grow, or what would we need to build that intimacy outside of conditions of captivity? It's a particular kind of intimacy that is only there because of the conditions. And so it just strikes me, particularly the way that you talk about experiences, relationships, organizing, that sometimes when we talk about, well, we'll just burn the whole thing down, right? We're not thinking about that stuff, all that stuff. But I don't know if that's what you kind of meant when you were like, wait, I'm not sure about ending the whole thing.
I am sure about abolishing prisons,
Oh,
without a doubt.
okay.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
What I've experienced and heard from so many people, and I push back against it when I hear it.
Yeah.
Prison saved my life. Prison saved my life. Prison saved my life.
Yeah.
And I tell them publicly a lot of times, and I sometimes embarrass people. No, you saved your life. The prison did not do anything for you. You did it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about that, and even in relationship to myself and what I didn't do a lot, I did what I could do, but it was the people around me. And it wasn't just my peers.
Mm-hmm.
There were volunteers that came in
Mm-hmm. that
contributed to that.
Mm-hmm.
There were some correctional staff that contribute to that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's tension there that exists because it just does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I cringe when I hear people say the prison saved me, but I get it.
Right.
And I try to introduce them to another way of looking at it, because it wasn't the prison that saved you. You just happened to be in the prison when you saved yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing things differently. But yeah, it's, maybe it's old age. When you start, maybe you just start to think as each year goes by. I don't know. I just start to think about other perspectives.
Yeah.
And I want to honor other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
You're mellowing out, Romarilyn.
Yeah, we've gone down another path. That's why I'm saying, I am mellowing out. Some days I'm a little crazy and radical. I still wear my revolutionary hat though, but it's interesting. It's really interesting.
I've never heard anyone speak more powerfully than you about those contradictions, actually, of like what it means to think in a revolutionary way about abolition while thinking about people and questions of emotion and questions of strength and desire and kind of resilience, but in this way that is not that is about kind of the decisions people make. In other words, I think what's particularly powerful about the ways you often speak about abolition is that you honor kind of individual capacity in this way that doesn't deny structural violence. And that is something that is hard for a lot of people to do. And it is also something that you do so distinctively, and it's, I know it means so much to so many people who are struggling to make sense of those tensions and contradictions. Like, how could I have succeeded? How can I think of myself as someone just not defined by precarity, someone who has created possibilities for this world, someone who has created possibilities for life, while also saying no more, none of this should ever happen again,
Yeah, it shouldn't, but it does, and it will.
Right.
And I may live to see the end of it, this system, and I may not live to see the end of the prison system.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
this is where we are. We're working two ends of the spectrum to try to get rid of something that I think continues to consume our communities.
Mhm.
At the same time, we have to support those inside because they are our community.
Mhm.
And it's just so,
Mhm.
it's crazy making. Yeah. So but that's, I think, what keeps the fire burning too.
Mhm.
We see beauty in that fire. That's why we gaze at it so long sometimes. That's why people get, when they look at fire, it's like looking at water.
Mhm. It's
It's so
metaphor.
tranquil, you just get sucked into it. And
Mhm.
at the same time, it's violent,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
it will consume you and kill you and everything in its path.
Right.
It's that destructive, but it's also that beautiful, somewhat like human beings,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
but then there's the human spirit
Right.
that regardless of the conditions,
Mhm. Mhm.
if we just focus on that, the human spirit, regardless of the conditions,
Mhm.
then I think we're called to a higher calling, to
Mm.
do more,
Mhm.
to be more,
Right.
to give more. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we try to work to exceed that all-consuming sort of violence and toll of the carceral system, and no one is more inspiring to me than you in doing that.
Ah,
I'm very
well, thank
grateful for your friendship. I know we're out of time, but I really appreciate you, Romarilyn.
thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure always just chatting with you and thinking through things with you. You are an amazing thought partner in so many ways for me, and an amazing teacher as well.
Well, thanks. No, I mean, you are one of my most cherished thinking partners. So we'll continue this soon, until our next conversation, right?
Yes.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye.